Segos El Guego. I'm Greg Horn, and I'm the editor and publisher of Yurdiwas, a newspaper here in Ganawage. And today in our podcast, we're going to be interviewing journalist extraordinaire Christopher Curtis. You may remember him from bylines in the Montreal Gazette, where he was covering Indigenous issues extensively for quite a while. And he has recently left that and gone on his own and started his own project with newsletter-based journalism.
Yeah, I'm buying and selling horses, actually. That's what I'm doing, So that's the future of journalism. Literal horse trading. No, I've been the concept is free journalism. So the journalism part of it is free. You read the articles for free. And then if you pay for a subscription, which you have, thank you very much, Greg, you get this newsletter every week, and the newsletter is a little bit more like a column. I get real personal on it sometimes, maybe too uncomfortably personal, but there's a real connection with the audience, and I get to do work that I care about, and I could do that at the Gazette, but in a bit more of a limited capacity. And now it's basically exclusively on stuff that really matters to me, and a lot of that just happens to be issues that relate to Indigenous communities.
Yeah, I mean, and you got your start in journalism quite a few years back, writing for one of the other papers across town from
us. The heady days of working at the newspaper you won't name, the Eastern Door. Yeah, well, there's a funny story, and I haven't told too many people this, but when I was at Concordia University, I was doing this. There was the eviction notices crisis, or like one of the times that it flared up, because it flares up now and again, and I saw some media coverage of it, and it was intriguing to me. And so, but I wanted to come and, introduce myself, and I couldn't find the community. Like I just like drove past it, and I couldn't find it. And so the story ended up being awful. And of course, I felt really bad that the only time I ever cared enough to come was like to cover, Mohawks are fighting Mohawks and how exciting. And it was really in that kind of pathetic moment of not being able to find I couldn't find the community. It's like, you can see it from the other side of the wall. You can see it from LaSalle. And after that, I just kind of realized that I was out of my depth, and that I should definitely build better, be a better person and be a better journalist. And I reached out to Steve, who graciously took my free labor at the time as a journalism student intern. We've all done it. And it was, I just fell in love with this place because I didn't know it existed really, and I grew up on the North Shore near Ganazadage, and I went to high school with Mohawks, but there was like this kind of like an unwritten understanding that they go home to their community, we go home to ours. Maybe we play ball against each other, maybe we joke around in math class, but there wasn't so much intermingling. And you try to kind of start to unpack that and figure out why that is. And coming to the Eastern Door was great because it felt, and this is, I don't know if this sounds like super cheesy or wrong or whatever, but it felt like home, it felt like you come to this place and it feels like a community. And I do feel a lot of like, I come from a small-ish town, like Two Mountains, there's maybe 2,000-3,000 Anglophones there, and everybody knows everyone. Everyone's kind of like cousins with everyone, and it could be great, but there can also be vicious rumors, and like, it's the small town thing. And I got that here, and I really liked it a lot. And I was most struck by how I only ever saw on the news, bad things happen, Mohawks end up on the news. And even in my own imagination, like, Mohawks were tough guys and tough women, and like, you don't mess with them. They faced off against the military, and like, you don't mess around, you keep your eyes down unless you want to throw down. It's not like that. I mean, sure, like, every town has its scrappy characters, and I'm sure I'd get my teeth kicked in by all of them, but it was nice to kind of see. It felt weird being in my 20s and finally realizing how badly I had missed the point, and how different what I was taught growing up was from reality. And it was a beautiful moment. It was like you feel a bit of shame, or you feel a lot of shame, and then but then you feel the love from the community. And I wanted other people to experience that transition. And it just so happens that was just a few years before Idle No More. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was ongoing at the time. The report hadn't been released yet, but I think as a country, we were starting to have a conversation that was a little bit more nuanced and a little bit less awful than it had been for, 150, 200, 300, however many years, a long time.
Yeah. So, and then after you got your start with covering an Indigenous community, you then went work for the Gazette, and during that time you had covered a lot of different things. You covered Montreal Canadiens, you did a lot of different things, but I think in from my perspective, some of your best work was covering Indigenous communities.
Well, that's very nice to say. Thank you. Well, I think it started off as there wasn't. When you're an intern at the newspaper, you have to find a way to give the newspaper something that they can't get anywhere else. And I see that your can of non-alcoholized beer just made a little ting sound there. So we're not having a beer on a Friday. But if we were, it would be Ganawage Brewing Co. and the wonderful people who work there. So support Greg. Support all media, please. The Rover needs your help too. Yeah, no, I just you just learn to give a shit, and you learn that there's a lot of joy in these communities, and there's a lot of nuance in these communities that doesn't make it into the page. And I wanted that to make it. And at first, in a very selfish way, it was how I could stand out as an intern. They didn't know anything about Indigenous issues, so I could kind of bullshit them and say, "Oh, this is very important. Like this should be on the front page," and they'd have to take it at face value, And that's how it went. That's and I believe it was the election of Odzi Simon, Sir Simon in Ganazadage at the time. So I covered that election, stepped on a few people's toes, like kind of learned what the boundaries are and what respectful dialogue looks like. And then what's fascinating about what's happening in a lot of communities. So like in Ganawage, and for instance, you have all these people who want to learn the language, right? You want to connect to the language that your ancestors spoke, because what would be more tragic than no longer being able to, than this language dying, right? It's this beautiful thing. It contains how you see the world, your vision of things. It sounds nice. The expressions are unique, and it could happen. It's conceivable that not only the language could die, but you change a few laws around in Canada, and you wait a few more generations, and there just aren't as many Mohawks. And that's so scary, right? Like that, I would imagine.
Yeah, and that's really part of the intent of the Indian Act, and the different policies that it created since Confederation. And throughout my lifetime, we've seen our community and others trying to unravel that.
Yeah,
and reclaim who we are as a community and who we are as a people, and reclaim our language. And one of those things was officially our community was known as Caughnawaga. Mm-hmm. Until the late 70s, early 80s, when finally the government realized, wait, no, we'll officially recognize it as Ganawage.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things, and there's we talk about, I think there's been a big discussion in Quebec lately about systemic racism, and
it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. Officially.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah. But those are some of the things that where there's racism is about the words that we use to describe people, mm-hmm. and the words that the government uses to describe people. And by saying, well, we're going to call them Caughnawaga because they're Caughnawaga, okay, they're Ganawage because that's what the name they call themselves.
Yeah. Allowing a little bit of agency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's what has always kind of struck me in a lot of these conversations is that we're just not, and when I say we, I mean like settlers, we're not listening. And when you listen, you create that space where we can finally kind of, I think a lot of people take it too personally, like on the settler side of things. They think that, you asserting your rights means somehow that I'm less legitimate, or they think that, the land back movement means what, we're all going to get kicked off the continent and back to Europe. Like, no, that's not what it is. And, and if you really consider yourself a patriot, right? If you really consider yourself like a true Canadian, and I have a very complicated relationship with that, but then you should want to live up to the promise of Canada. You should want to live up to the words in that Constitution, Section 35, the rights of Indigenous people, the United Nations Declaration. Like, these are all very nice things, but you have to live that and you have to practice that if you really believe in it. And I'm lucky in that I've seen a lot of people's views evolve on it. There's still a ton of racism, and probably two of the groups in Canada where it's most socially acceptable to have racial bias against: Indigenous people and Muslims. Like the two kind of groups that people still can get away with, like a newspaper article that is just, if you were to replace the word Mohawk with blacks, or if you were to replace the word Muslims with Jewish people, you would suddenly start to see like, oh wait, no, this is twisted. This is messed up. I don't know why we have. Anyways, I'm maybe getting a little too far into the weeds here, but a lot of, unpacking these questions is it hurts. It's painful, but there can also be a lot of hope there. And what I see in this community is hope. And what I see in this community is, like, when I went to college and I met Walter Scott and later I met Gunya Diohorn, I saw people who were very similar to me. I mean, culturally, there's a few different things that make Mohawk people distinct, but I saw this kind of small town, weird, artsy vibe mixed with like a little bit of hillbilly stuff, driving trucks around and getting into trouble and shooting off fireworks. And like, I'm all about that, I'm all, and having a relationship with the land and having cousins and getting into wrestling matches in the front yard of your house. Like, there's something about that I think is so much more honest. Like, what I love about this community is people, they don't bullshit you. Like, if they don't like you, or if they have a problem with what you're doing, they'll let you know. Where I'm, when I'm in the city, like, I'll get a lot of bullshit. I'll get, oh yeah, people super nice to your face. And then you turn around, look at that asshole, look at him leave, whatever, And so anyways, it's one of the things I like. I've lost track of what we're even talking about. I'm sorry. I barely sleep in these days.
I mean, I think we're just talking about a lot of different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think probably the main theme is you being a non-Indigenous person, but being able to cover Indigenous issues in a very authoritative way. That when you're covering things that the people and when you're reading what you're writing, the reader gets the sense that they're getting to know the person that you're writing about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think like something I learned early on was if when you're writing something in the pit of your stomach, you would feel awkward for the person you're writing about to read that about themselves, don't write it. Like, it's not, if you're going to say something, own it and say it to someone's face. There have been times with like big politicians where I would say that to this person's face. Like, I would say that this is maybe not heartless or something, but I would tell them what I think about it. And I never want to write something about a community and then have to hide next time I come, or hope that I never get assigned this community again. And the thing that working at the Eastern Door taught me, and had I worked with you, I would have learned the same thing, is that to be here when things are shitty, and to be here when there's a conflict, or when I think you need to earn that. And I think you need to kind of show up when things are good, and you need to show the outside world what a wonderful place this is and what a great thing this is. And you need to show them the dignity in that struggle to keep your language, to keep traditions alive, to hold your elders in a higher esteem. I mean, in Quebec, you have to look no further than our COVID statistics to see how we treat our elders. And so you have to, I think, highlight that without being patronizing, without glossing over the bad things. But like, I think if you show people that nuanced dignity, then that's good. But then something I also learned was many people have come before me and have done this the wrong way, probably through no fault of their own. There's just a bunch of biases they bring to this, and probably some were just straight up racist. I think we know that actually to be true. But what I'm getting at here is that trust is not there with the mainstream media, rightfully so. If they only ever come to collect the bad stories and make you look like bad Mohawks because it sells newspapers. I'm not going to trust that person. I'm not going to trust that person's. But what I wanted to do is like, if a kid from town read about themselves in the paper, I would want them to see reality reflected. I don't want them, for the only time they ever see themselves in the newspaper, for them to be angry about it because it makes them feel less than or inferior. It makes them ashamed to be where they're from. So that's kind of been my guiding principle. You know, a lot of people have met. The New York Times recently went to Nunavut and just did an awful piece. It was just what you would call tragedy porn or trauma porn, and they took things out of context, and they made the Inuit look like just a bunch of drunken idiots, and like they needed someone to kind of hold their hand, and it's something that I think has been done again and again and again, and I just don't want to be that person, and I want to be able to go back to these very selfishly. Like I like writing about this because I like hanging out with you guys, and I like being here, and I like, you know, I love the culture of like collectibles in Ganawage, and like the pro wrestling fascination, and, you know, and no, seriously, and like the graffiti under the bridge, and then there's like all this. I want to be able to come back here. I want to be able to show my face in town and not, you know, not feel like I've run afoul of this community, and that applies to every Indigenous community that I've tried to cover. But I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've hurt a lot of people's feelings. And sometimes and I'm realizing this now, but I've kind of used the connection with our community here, with this community here. And I've said, well, you know, someone has said, well, you don't give a shit about this or that. And, well, look at this relationship that I have with these people. Look how great I am. I'm not happy that I've done that. And I'm going to try to stop doing that. And I don't want to use other people's stories and pain and whatever to like build me up or for it to be like a highlight reel in my career. So sometimes I kind of have to remember, like, do what you're doing, but do it for the right reasons. So this is like the therapy. I should be paying you. I'm sorry.
I mean, and that's one of the things that I've tried to tell people that I know within the mainstream that I went to school with and I've worked with, is that.
Who are some of the people that you went to school with that are still working?
Sid Banerjee.
Oh, I like Sid a lot. Yeah. Sid's such a nice guy.
Yeah. Paul Karwatsky, who just now
he left. He just
left. You know, I went to school with those guys, and you know, just trying to tell people that, listen, if you want to cover Ganawage, but cover us when there's good things too.
Yeah.
You know, cover the good news, not just whenever there's, you know, a demonstration or we're fighting for something or there's bad news.
Yeah.
Like, because our community is more than just that. And
look at how many actors and entertainers and athletes and politicians and thinkers come from this community.
Yeah.
And how little we know about them in the mainstream press. But when you start to realize the contributions that Ganawage has made and that your sister communities have made to the history of this continent, you have to present that too.
Yeah. You know, and that's, you know, it's a huge thing. And once you start to know the community and know the people of the community, then you start understanding why we do certain things and why we react certain ways when things happen. Right. And then there's starting to be, there'll start to be an understanding why something like the railway blockade last year happens. Yeah.
And that was a great example of like an utter failure of the mainstream media to get it right.
Yeah.
There were some that I think I shouldn't say writ large and judge everyone. CBC had really good coverage. CTV had really good coverage at times. I hope the Gazette had good coverage. It's not for me to say. But when you look at like Le Journal de Montréal, they describe, Denise Bombardier described this place like some sort of lawless, like it was like Mad Max, you know?
Yeah.
Mohawks running around with machine guns. And it's like, I think she said the weapons used by Hamas and I don't know, the Taliban. Like, you're comparing your neighbors to the Taliban. Like, no one's stoning women here. No one's like executing people in a fucking soccer stadium. I'm really sorry. You can bleep that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And the other thing too is that if you didn't know where the railway blockade, and I'm using air quotes here, was, you wouldn't know because you would just drive right by it.
Yeah,
you know,
it's a chair. It was a chair. It was like a lawn chair, and they lost the lawn chair at one point. So.
So that
wasn't even anything. It was a snowbank.
Yeah, it was a snowbank. It somebody called and said, okay, we're blocking the train tracks, and they made a fire next to the train tracks. There was never anything physically blocked. And
nobody vandalized anything.
Yeah.
It was peaceful. There were children. Like what really, and I kind of lost my shit, and I was warned by my bosses, like on Twitter, you're starting to cross certain lines. And I respect that they were probably right about that. But what struck me because it wasn't like there was one bad column saying there's AK-47s. The premier said there's AK-47s in there, which like, look, technically, yeah, sure. Somebody was arrested with a machine gun weeks earlier, months earlier, whatever it is. But like you go to every community around Montreal. What, the Hells Angels don't exist in the next, like, come on.
Yeah. And in that instance, there was 3 people that were arrested.
And like 2 of them were non-Indigenous.
Yeah.
One of them, I don't remember.
One was from Ganawagi, and then 2 were not.
Yeah.
So it's,
and like the point is the law worked. They were arrested and the weapons were confiscated. Like
yes,
it's not lawlessness. It's the opposite of lawlessness. They thought they could get away with it. They didn't.
Yeah.
So all of which is to say, you had a lot of articles that it's at a moment where we need cool heads, and Gunya Dio, who has become like my sister, like such a close friend of mine. I think about her. I think about her mom. I think about the children that I saw in this camp. And I worried that all of this rhetoric that was coming out of this newspaper, that was, let's not mince words. It was hateful and it was racist. This is dangerous. And all it takes, and luckily this didn't happen. And I don't think it would have, but it could. All it takes is one maniac, one person who hates himself or has enough crazy things going on in his head and has racism in his heart. All it takes is one person with a gun to come and do something that can never be taken back, and that will irreparably damage relationships between both communities. So I kind of lost my shit a little bit there. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the times I really started to question, like, should I still be in the mainstream? Like, should I do my own thing, whatever? And covering that, it was just before, we were joking about this earlier, like, it was back in the good old days when it was the Mohawks that were going to destroy the Canadian economy. And now it's COVID-19. But yeah, no, that was to me, that was a real wake up moment. But I think that had this happened 20 years ago, the coverage would have been much worse.
Yes.
So like there has been progress, but not enough.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years ago, we had the community was protesting or demonstrating its support for the Micmac with the Marshall decision. And, because following the Marshall decision and then the Supreme Court's subsequent, how would you put it?
They kind of delayed. They made a ruling that was unenforced, not unenforced.
They made a ruling and then they made they're like, well,
you figure it out.
It's a ruling, but let's put a clarification saying that the ruling is this. But during that time, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans vessels were running over Micmac fishers.
Yeah.
And so we had, done some, as a community did some support actions and things like that. Nothing crazy, nothing like blocking the railway or blocking the seaway or anything like that. But I think the tensions were high. And if we would look back into some of the newspaper archives from that time, from 1999, there'd be some pretty, I'm sure to be some pretty scathing editorials. Denouncing us for supporting, people who 9 years before were supporting us, our community in here in Ganawagi and Ganastag.
Yeah, I mean that's and that still goes on, and I think specifically because we're in Quebec, there's a bit of a linguistic divide on how the community gets covered, and I think it strikes. Being Quebecois is like a complicated thing, and being a human being is a complicated thing. But like my mom's side of the family is French Canadian, and I speak French. I love living here. I think there are so many really cool things about being Quebecois, but there is also a really strange there's like some strange logical jujitsu happening where, on the one hand, you want to have all of the grievances and the rights of a colonized people. You want to be able to say, look, the British came, they colonized us. We were here first and we were hard done by. And don't get me wrong, the British did some fucked up shit. Like they did some bad things. And to French settlers. Of course they did. And that was terrible. And what happened to the Acadians was unfathomable. So that's a war crime, like in modern day. But by the same token, you played the colonialism game and you lost. Like you didn't, nobody invited you here. Nobody sent a letter across the Atlantic and said, hey, please come down, be one of us. So there's a bit of bias there, I think, when it comes to, well, there's a lot, but like it's subconscious, Yes, things were bad, but we were better. We were nicer colonialists than the British. So we were allies with indigenous people. And then you mentioned Mohawks, and
we're allies to everybody but them.
I was in an argument with someone the other day where they said, well, the Mohawks, they call them Mohawks is a derivative of an Anishinaabe word that like means man eater. Anyways, they didn't call them that for nothing. They were cannibals. And this is a smart person. This is a person involved in provincial politics. This is a person that I've had many good conversations with. And on the question of Mohawks, they become completely unreasonable. And it becomes this, they're saying things that cause you to, you then realize I can't be friends with this person. It's no longer a matter of like, well, we just disagree. I like the Montreal Canadiens, you like the New York Rangers. It becomes like, no, you're supporting genocide, or you're adopting this language about this people that's really dehumanizing, and that kind of makes it easier to commit violence against them. And there's a lot of that. I don't think it's like, again, like I think Quebec is a great place, and I think there is a complicated, and people are changing, and that's good. But there is, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the people who were involved in the nationalist movement were involved for the right reasons, but a lot of people, or at least too many people, for them, Quebecer is like an ethno-nationalist kind of thing. Like it's like, you got to be white, you got to be Christian, you got to be, so that kind of freaks me out. And that's one of the things that's been hardest to shut up about publicly.
I mean, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago, the Journal column that got pulled.
Yeah. Man. I wrote a column about that.
Yeah, so did I. I wrote my editorial after we spoke.
The curious case of the disappearing column.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it shows you that, first of all, you spoke about it on the show, right?
Yeah, we did, I think, probably.
Well, so, I mean, I guess the long and short of it is the Proud Boys, that organization that in the United States and here, it exists here as well.
Just started in Canada.
Yeah, it was started by a Canadian, Gavin McKines, former Montrealer. Shit. Yeah, we only send them our worst. The Proud Boys had been declared like a terrorist group by the federal government. Yeah. And then I don't even remember his name because I don't even want to say his name. In Journal de Montréal, it says, well, if the Proud Boys are going to be called a terrorist organization, what do you call the Warriors, the Mohawk Warriors? Which is just, and they just pulled it. Sometimes they'll like clean the language up a bit without telling you they did, without like, if you put a correction in your article, you should tell the readers you made a mistake. It's just normal. But they just took it off and didn't say anything about it. And I think on the one hand, I'm encouraged that, we can push them into taking it away. But on the flip side, like they published this.
Yeah. So they
gave one of the biggest newspapers in Canada. Yeah. I don't think it made it in the print, but like it's one of the biggest media empires in North America, published an article saying Mohawk Warriors, which completely misunderstands what Mohawk Warriors are, but Mohawk Warriors should be called terrorists. Like our neighbors, the Mohawks, should be called terrorists.
And then brings up all these things trying to prove his point that are decades old. Yeah,
decades old. And then the funny thing is, a lot of these people are the same people who will say, get over it. Residential schools, get over it. Something, get over it. And then they'll be like, well, 350 years ago, the Mohawks allied with the British, and we'll never forget that. Like, well, you can get over it. I'm not saying anyone should get over residential school. That's like, you believe me, you deal with that and you hold on to that as long as you need to. But like these people who will go back and say, Mohawks were allied with the British and they committed war crimes against the Hurons, and like a lot of these people who will go that far back will also say, well, your grievances are old. You don't, everything's fine now. So shut up.
And well, you can't affect third party interests, and you can't do this, you can't do that. And, oh, well, it wasn't us. It was the British. It was, all these different things or
as though no residential school was run by someone who speaks French.
Yeah.
Like, the priests there were all like or everybody was racist.
Yeah,
Let's just be honest.
Or the Jesuits didn't.
No, they didn't do it.
Yeah.
The Sulpicians didn't steal the patch of land, where Gunasdage is today. Like that was someone else.
And here in Ganawag, it was the Jesuits. Yeah. And there's actually a piece of land in Saint Constant or Candiac that, as things were stolen, there's one patch of land that's big enough to put a shed on that's still Ganawag.
There you go.
And somehow it didn't get eaten up and all this and that. So there's a lot of different things, right? And so let's switch some gears here.
Yeah. Sorry, God.
But let's talk more about the rover and what you're doing, and some of the things that you're covering and how you choose to cover what you're covering.
Well, the rover. When I was at the Gazette, one of the things the pandemic did is I think it forces you to start to. There's obviously a huge, terrible side of it. People are dying. And then there's also the loneliness and the isolation. And I started to kind of consider all of the, all of the work that I had done at the Gazette and how much of it was no longer possible because there's this misconception that when we cover Indigenous issues poorly, it's because someone's telling us to, or when we don't cover certain things, it's because there's like an agenda. It's mostly just laziness. I shouldn't say laziness. It's mostly just there's an absence of resources. You don't have all of these resources is one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is not enough journalists come from First Nations or Indigenous communities. So there's not a ton of coverage. But then what ended up happening is, with me and the Gazette, we left on good terms in that, but it was harder and harder to cover things that I cared about because we just didn't have, the industry's collapsing. You only have so many reporters on your roster. You need to cover the news in the city and there's priorities, and I don't get to make those decisions. And so more and more it was just, what can you flip in a day? What can you, and I wanted to be able to work on longer term projects. And so I was starting to think like, well, if I left and went on my own, how could I fund that? How could I finance that? I started to talk with Ethan Cox at Ricochet, which is like it's a progressive media. Like we come at things from maybe a left of center angle, but we don't lie about it. Our biases are pretty clear. So we decided that we would partner. They would use the stories. They would publish the stories that I wrote. And together we built this brand, the Rover, where people can go to rover.substack.com. Little free plug there. And for $12.50 a month, they will receive four newsletters a month, or one newsletter every Friday. And we're trying to work like Zoom calls and different things into there. And when COVID's over, we're going to throw a big party and it'll be like free food for everyone. And I really want to make sure that we foster that sense of community. But they become kind of like partners in this. They believe in the mission, and the mission is to get them stories that you can't get anywhere else. And it's not always Indigenous stories. There's stuff about labor. There's stuff about, we did something about prisoners getting COVID, what the conditions are like there, migrant detention centers, that kind of stuff. But a lot of the focus has been on Indigenous communities. I really wanted to build a relationship with the Anishinaabe communities near Val-d'Or, where 5 years ago there was that awful scandal where you had that Radio Canada report detailing all these allegations of sexual abuse from police against Indigenous women and physical abuse. And when that ended, it kind of fizzled out and nobody really stuck around to see how things are on the ground for the people who came forward. So,
and then the Vienna Commission came out.
Yeah. yeah, the Vienna Commission comes out and they say, look, systemic racism exists, and you have a government who's denying that it exists. And so we kind of wanted to position ourselves as like, no matter who's in power right now it's the CAC. And if you read the polls, it'll be the CAC for the next 100 years. But no matter who's in power, we want to be a check on that power. We want to consistently like look at their accomplishments or whatever one by one and kind of examine what they're doing. So lately, one of the stories this week is they approved the Coalition Avenir Québec government approved what would be the largest open pit graphite mine in North America. It's only about 150 kilometers north of Montreal. It's just outside. Well, it's on traditional Atikamekw territory, and if anything were to happen with the tailings, which happens in mining, it's nobody wants it to happen, but it does. It's just how mining works. If anything were to happen, it could poison the waterways that flow into the St. Lawrence and into the Ottawa River, and not to mention all of the Anishinaabe communities to the west of the Atikamekw territory, and all of the Innu communities to the east of it, and then all of the non-Indigenous community. Like, everybody drinks water. We all have that in common. I mean, not my cousin Reg. It's all just soda for him, but I don't have a cousin Reg. But my point is, like, they, so that kind of flew under the radar, right? There's not a ton of media attention for a variety of reasons. It's far to drive out there. The issues are complicated to explore, and there's a pandemic, and that's dominating the news. And I get that. So what we try to do is kind of like find where there's a vacuum, find where there's space, and go and occupy that space and amplify that story. So this week it was this mining story.
You're a couple of months into this new way of doing journalism. How is it working for you?
Well, I'm my own boss a little bit. Like, I do work with editors but I'm also like, I realize that I'm either a really bad boss or a terrible employee. Like, but it's really hard to be your own boss. Like, I like it. I always feel like I'm not productive enough. I'm learning to relax a little bit and really pick my spots and remember that I'm not a daily newspaper, and that, so financially it's working really well. We have about 700 paid subscribers, which for a newsletter based publication is with one person so far is good. That's me convincing myself that I made the right choice, which hopefully I did. That's going well. So the money side of it's, well, I'm not making what I was at the Gazette, I'm making a fraction of what I was at the Gazette, but because I'm my own business, I can like deduct all kinds of things on taxes, which is great. But there's that. I do get the occasional freelance contract on the side. It's working, it's going great. I mean, we pushed hard on homelessness coverage, and I think we were part of a movement to build pressure. Like, because of our coverage, a law firm reached out to some homeless organizations, represented some people in court, and got the curfew suspended for the homeless. I don't think we did that immediately, but we were part of coverage that helped create that environment. Because of our coverage on the illegal dump in Ganazadage, we managed to be a part of a group of you're a part of that. The Eastern Door is part of that. A group of people who put pressure on the government to take action. So they suspended the permit. And now there's even there could be legal action in the future, not to like get a bunch of money or whatever, but just to make sure that we know exactly what's in the soil and what's in the air, and to make sure that Mohawk families aren't suffering and aren't being exposed to just dangerous chemicals, and people in the surrounding communities as well. And I think one of the things we don't do a good enough job of saying in the media is that like all of this like land defender stuff, water, air, mining projects, whatever, it's not only Indigenous people who would benefit from it. It's like we all breathe air. Not Reg. Reg only takes bong hits. But no, I'm just kidding. He doesn't exist. I made him up. Anyways, I'm sorry. I've lost her, but it's going well, Greg. It's going well.
All right.
It's going well.
So if somebody wants to subscribe and help support this and read some of your coverage, how do they do that?
First of all, before I say anything, I just want to say thanks for having me here. And thanks for the work you do. And you're part of a really vibrant media in this community. And you've been in the game for, you were telling me, 24 years. And I got nothing but respect for that, because so many people rightfully just give up because it's so hard. So thank you, Greg. And I just wanted to say that. But yeah, so if you want to subscribe, if you haven't been bored out of your mind so far and you're still in it, and what I'm saying right now isn't influencing you to just throw your podcast machine at the wall, rover.substack.com. You can subscribe, or you can just sign up for the free newsletter. You get there's a free newsletter every month, or however, you'll get the occasional free newsletter, and maybe that will entice you to make a further investment in this journalism adventure of mine that we're all in together. And when the pandemic restrictions are eased up or lifted, or when we get through this, I do plan on throwing like a big party to say thanks to everyone who supported us. I will get some sponsors, whatever. There's going to be free food, and I'm going to get a bouncy castle for the kids. No, really, like, I think it's so important that if we're on this adventure together, we have each other. And thank you for supporting the Rover, and thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you very much. This is Greg Horn, and you were listening to the Yurdi Was a podcast. And if you have any comments or questions or anything you'd like to hear us talk about, comment down below. Thank you very much.